I'm Jen Valenga, and this is the Ditch Your Backup Plan podcast. Stories of rewarding careers between starving artist and celebrity to give you the inspiration to ditch your backup plan and get out there and create.
I think I had enough cues along the way that I was like, I'll be able to get some kind of living. Once I booked the General Electric commercials, I was like, oh, okay, I can make something out of this. You know, you don't always get your dreams, but I do think in this sphere, there are things to find for most people.
Today's episode features Gianmarco Soresi. He's a stand-up comic, actor, and writer, but the first line of his obituary will probably say, guy from all those General Electric commercials. You probably recognize him from those. Gianmarco made his CBS television debut on Blue Bloods, playing Tom Selleck's waiter. And he was the winner of Amazon's Comics Watching Comics Season 8. He's also the creator of the sketch series Matza Pizza, which led to Funny or Die greenlighting one of their pitches as a Funny or Die original. You can see a lot of these sketches on his website, gianmarcosoresi.com, or the Fearless Friends Facebook group, where I will be posting some of these sketches. You should also check him out on TikTok. Gianmarco was a student of mine many years ago, and I was so happy to be able to interview him. We've been trying to get this together since last year. The funny thing is, I think I cast him for the first time as a musical theater actor, long before he ever was working in the stand-up arena. I just want to say a little bit of something about programs. I never want you to feel like I'm disparaging any program, especially the University of Miami, where I'm both an alum and I used to teach there, and I had some amazing years at the University of Miami. But sometimes when I talk to guests about how we can mitigate challenges in education moving forward, it seems like the University of Miami gets the short end of the stick. And that's really not my intention. My really good friend Jennifer Burke is the chair of the department at the University of Miami, and she's doing great things. So a big shout out and hug to Jen Burke and all of the students who currently go to UM. I just want you to know that we have a lot of respect for what you do, and as we have conversations about how we can improve the educational system for all actors and theater artists out there, all of these programs have very different but exceptional things to offer students. You know, when it really comes down to it, it has to be about fit. So if you're a high school student and you're listening and you're thinking about what program to go to, you really just need to visit or talk to faculty and students that are at the program. You've got to find the place that feels like your home. And the other thing to know is that places change for the better and sometimes for the worse. So you shouldn't be relying on any reputation for any program. You really need to see who's there now. I've been trying to get faculty on my podcast periodically. You heard from Vince Cardinal, who's at the University of Michigan, and Jerry J. Cranford, who's at K-State with me. I'll get Jennifer Burke on for an interview in the near future. We've been trying to put that together. If there are other programs where you want to hear from someone, please reach out to me and let me know. I'd love to have an interview with them so we can share with students out there what different programs are offering for you. Again, it's about fit, and I have a lot of love and respect for all of my colleagues around the country. I also need to let you know that I did not censor Gianmarco. I didn't think that was a good idea for someone who's a stand-up comic. So this week's episode is explicit. So if you're listening with kids, just know that. I didn't bleep out any of the expletives, and there's some adult content, so you might want to just maybe listen in advance or be ready to cover little ears. I've been doing several podcast interviews over the last week or so to bring you guests in the next month. And it's been really inspiring for me. I'm very excited about who's coming in the near future. I will say, though, this is week 3 since students started back to classes and I'm on sabbatical, and I really miss them. I really miss my students. I guess I didn't realize how much I would miss them. So if you're a current K-State student listening in, just know I miss you. Okay, here's my episode with Gianmarco Soresi. Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, hanging in there.
Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from the Lower East Side of New York City, where it is very snowy right now. And things are still pretty shut down. But apparently they're allowing weddings next month up to 150 people. People are not happy about it, but
Are you getting married?
no, I mean, maybe I'll get hired to tell jokes at a wedding. We'll see. But yeah, it's all pretty shut down still.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember in March, like I canceled a gig because a lot of comedians, the smarter comedians, were being like, guys, we shouldn't be performing. And I would consider myself a medium smart comedian. And I was like, which do I do? Which side do I go to? And I canceled. And I had that thought of like, oh my God, what if this lasts for 3 weeks? I have these gigs coming up. And like, if we had known it would be a year, part of me is glad. I think I would have fallen to the floor crying. I mean, if you really understood the full extent.
I got on Instagram for this podcast and you popped up, and of course I followed you right away. And you early on did that. You've repurposed it a few times, but you did that little sketch where you were, I don't know if you call it a sketch, but where you were, where you wiping down the.
Yeah.
Still called a sketch when you do like an Instagram sketch.
Yeah. I think the word sketch comedians hate is skit. That's the one to avoid, but sketch is great. Sketch is the universal.
Nobody in performing arts at all likes the name skit ever.
Sure. I mean, that's like what parents do to undermine your value.
Your little skit.
So yeah, that was an early one where it was like cleaning. I remember cleaning groceries in the beginning. I remember going to the grocery store was like a 2-hour affair, and it was like you suited up, gloves, masks, and then you got home and you washed everything. And now, I mean, the thought of that is insane. Now I haven't done anything.
Do you wipe down your groceries anymore?
Oh my God, no! I stopped the moment the CDC was like, maybe not surfaces. I was done.
Yeah. But I do think of that. Almost every time I bring home my groceries, I'm like, Gianmarco sketch. Should I wipe these down? No, I'm in Kansas. I'm not.
Yep.
I'm not. Okay, so you're a stand-up comic. Is that, I mean, because I met you as a musical theater performer many, many, many moons ago, but I think of you as a stand-up artist, but also an actor and writer. You've done so many opera. I mean, you've done so many things. So how do you characterize yourself now?
I think a couple years ago, I felt like stand-up comedian was like my number one thing. As you said, I was like super into musical theater. Then I was in an acting company, and I thought like I want to be the world's greatest actor. And then
Daniel Day-Lewis, right? Wasn't that your hero?
One of my favorites. Yeah. And then like 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote a play that went to the Fringe Festival, and it had a lot of like monologuing in it. And I had a producer friend who took me out, and she was like, you should be focusing on this. Like, that's where you shine. And once I started getting into, stand-up, it's a different lifestyle. I was not used to going out every night. You're giving up your nights, especially in the beginning when you're hustling. You're giving up your nights forever. And once I got into it, though, it just felt like the thing I was good at. The thing I felt like, oh, I could be really excellent at this. I understand it. And eventually one day I was like, yeah, I'm a stand-up comedian. And now in bios, like I feel fine saying I'm a stand-up comedian, and they can find out about the other stuff.
Sure.
But that's how I identify now.
I had a flash. I remember the Facebook play that you wrote?
I do. A folk book. It was
a book. And the whole thing was like, I remember the conversation around like, this is a moment. Like this has to happen now.
Yeah, I mean, looking back, and it's like someone wrote a play about MySpace. I mean, I think that's what's so hard about all internet stuff, all political stuff, and including comedy. Like, you just have to be careful talking about social media because it changes so quickly, and the joke feels dated so fast.
I think everything feels dated because I don't even think we know what we're living in right now. And then add the pandemic to it. We're in this like historical moment we can't even reflect on right now.
I think artistically, I've seen a lot of, at least on Twitter, which is a very specific point of view, but they're like so sick. They don't want to see coronavirus in TV shows and movies. They don't want to see masks. And it's kind of interesting to look at a segment of reality and say, like, I understand this is part of reality. We don't want this a part of our art because it's so, it's non-compelling. I mean, what it's just people wearing masks so you can't see their faces. So it's just like an interesting time when it's like reality does not lend itself to intriguing art.
But how do you keep those sets safe? I mean there's lots of ways.
everyone says they're being safe. You heard that Tom Cruise rant. Did you hear that one?
Yes.
And it's like, sure, he's right, but I'm sure he's getting paid a lot more than those crew members are. I did one game show for Quibi, and they try to be safe. They put you in a room, but ultimately, once you get on set, you take off the masks. And Josh Groban was there, and if either of us had coronavirus, we would have given it to the other.
Yeah, so. I mean, my son's basketball team, they just got out of quarantine because somebody had COVID-19, and they let two parents go. But you're like looking, they're sitting on the bench with their masks on, but then they get in the game, and my son's like guarding this kid from another school, and they're all up in each other's faces breathing, and I'm thinking, well, I hope that kid doesn't have it.
Of course. There was something with the NBA too, where like someone got fined for hugging the other player or something after the game. And it was like, they were just playing basketball.
Right. Okay, so you characterize yourself as, you're a stand-up comic. That's what you do. You had a long journey to get there. What are some of the things you're proudest of?
I'm proudest of, like, I think when I first started stand-up, I really understood. I started at 27 years old, and I was competing with people. Some of the lucky ones who started when they were 13. Some people who started when I was at college that had started stand-up that I knew there. So I was starting a little bit later. I had stage presence beyond the average stand-up comedian, but my weakness was writing comedy. That's the thing I hadn't been doing for 10 years. And I feel like I understood very quickly what I had to get better at. And I wrote like crazy. I mean, you know how I used to practice singing. There's a tinge of OCD to it, but I can utilize it for good sometimes. And I wrote a lot, and I found a club, very shitty club called LOL. And I just did the check spot, which is where you're on a show, you go up. That's the moment they drop the checks on all the audience members. And it's terrible. And they don't try to finesse it. They don't give a shit. They'll drop it right as you get on stage. No one pays attention because no one's laughing. Everyone also thinks you suck. And it's a terrible cycle. But I did, for like a year, I did every check spot at that club. So 4 to 5 to, in the holiday seasons, 8 times a night. And I just felt like I was able to move up fast.
And you think the consistency is one of the things that helped you?
For sure. It was the consistency.
Besides your talent, of course.
I appreciate it. But yeah, it's the consistency. And it's just like understanding what I was weaker at. I mean, there's certainly a kind of feeling towards actors who become stand-up comics of like, do you really want to do this? It takes a long time to gain respect in the comedy world. And especially in LA, there's so many actors who do stand up. So they have 5 minutes. So they get the agent and they call themselves stand-ups, and they couldn't do an hour to save their life. So I think it was just like really taking the steps necessary to be a card-carrying member of the stand-up comedy world. I feel very proud of.
I'm proud of you too. I said early on in this podcast, I don't want to tell former students I'm proud of them because it feels patronizing, but someone reached out to me and said, you should say you're proud. I was like, okay, I'm proud of you, Gianmarco.
I think it is like, in this kind of business, it's really just proud of someone who's continuing to, because the successes come and go. Like, plenty of people, when I was the General Electric spokesman for like a year and a half, spokesman light. And it's like, more people were saying they were proud of me at that moment. But all I did was I got an audition appointment at the right time. And I said this gig turned into more gigs. I think that's the problem with performing, and like the way people relate to it is they see success and that's the moment they're proud. And oftentimes the success is like completely random. It's more about, do you stay in it? Do you keep working? Do you push yourself when things aren't coming in money-wise?
The staying power. And I mean, I think sometimes the proudest moment is like that joke that finally landed because you tweaked it just the right way. No one's clapping for that. That's your own satisfaction.
Yeah.
So during the General Electric thing, were you doing stand up at that time?
I had done like here, like when I was at the University of Miami, I did a summer in New York, an acting program, and I did like a stand-up comedy class once a week. And these classes are notoriously poo-pooed because it's hard to teach comedy, especially to a class. But the real reason I think one should do it is if like you want someone to say, "Hey, in 8 weeks, you're going to do 5 minutes on a stage in front of people." It gives you a deadline. And so I did that class. I loved it. I came back to my senior year and I just did an hour for my friends, which is it's kind of wild. That's not how it goes. You don't do 5 minutes, then an hour.
I don't think I saw that.
Yeah, it was just one time I did it in the black box, and it was like wildly dirty. I mean, I think I pretty much touched on every time I had sex up to that point, and just wild. Then I just was one of those actors who said, "Yeah, I do stand-up comedy." And every 4 months, every 6 months, I would do a show or a bringer show, as they call them, where you have to bring the audience. And they're notoriously like hot crowds because they're there to be supportive. And I would do those, and I would think like, "Oh my god, I'm great." I would always do a new 5-10 minutes for the hottest crowd you could imagine, and I would walk away thinking, "I'm really good at this." And that's the thing with stand-up. We're like, you only stand-ups can truly know how much a crowd can give the impression that someone's good or bad. I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, I mean, I've been an audience member before, but
Who are your faves? Who do you like any in particular?
you're my fave.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Actually, the reality is, I mean, I could probably think of a few, but whenever I was coming to New York over spring breaks, I was always trying to find a stand-up gig that you had to visit. I haven't visited, but like half the time it was like there's some godforsaken place that's like not anywhere near anything else. And that's part of it too, at least in New York
Yeah,
City,
yeah,
is
yeah.
like, how far do I have to travel to get there?
Sure. And it's honestly, I'm a little bit nervous. It's just like I can't. I'm very excited for the world to reopen, but man, I have really gotten used to not commuting. It's not like a part of my life. And when stand up is hot, I mean, going to 4 different spots in one night and relying on the subways is pretty brutal. And
Yeah,
it's going to take some adjusting to get back into that.
that's probably been a nice break.
Yeah.
What was your lifestyle like growing up versus, you said every night, you give up every night. Was your lifestyle growing up very different than how you run your life now?
As like a kid,
Yeah.
I was a very lazy kid. And I part of when I went to college, I was like, oh, I'm going to be different now. I was always
You
just
were the
lazy.
hardest worker, really a hard worker, like
I
too
I
hard.
yeah, I have too hard. I would agree. Um, I think as a kid, I mean, my parents were divorced, and my dad was like the dad who like just spoiled the crap out of me. So I would do a karate class, and then I would get tired of waking up early to go, and my dad would be like, "That's fine, we can quit." Or one time he let me. I was on the swimming team, and the pool was too cold, and my dad was like, "All right, let's go." And I think it's like his dad, I think, was abusive or mean. And it's one of those like classic, he decided to be the opposite to the point of just spoiling the shit out of me. And decent academically, but I was just a kid who played video games, watched a lot of TV shows. And I look back and I wish I always, whenever I hear about like Tiger Moms or things like that, there's part of me that kind of longs for it because I wish when I didn't have the ambition or the wherewithal for someone to have pushed me. But I think with divorce and my mom and dad and both of them kind of not wanting to upset me too much, lest I say I want to spend all the time at the other parent house. I was just kind of lazy until I found theater. I always liked theater, and I was at those smaller schools where it was easy to be kind of the king of the theater department. And once I got into singing, that was the first time I like really saw I had a goal in my mind of the kind of things I wanted to sing and the abilities I wanted to have, and I started working hard.
Do you sing anymore?
No, I mean, like, I'll do vocal warm-ups. I feel like I really with singing, I first of all, I think it's very tough to teach singing. Like, it's one of these things where you can get better, but part of life in all art forms is, like, understanding where your limits lie and being so for me, I feel like, and this is hard because it's like there's no one to blame, but what makes, I think, pursuing an arts degree can be challenging, where it's like you don't know when you're 18 how good you can be at something. And uh I think with singing, I just hit a wall in college that I really tried to push past. There was no one in our class, at least, who would practice singing more than I did. And whether it was I had a voice teacher outside of Miami, but then I worked with teachers there. There were all sorts of things. I never seemed to reach this next level, or I never felt like I was going to be able to sing the songs I wanted to sing. And I would look at people like Heath Saunders in our class, who he wouldn't mind this mention, where people with these insane vocal talents or these insane abilities, musical abilities, and get to New York, and there's thousands of Heath Saunders level singers and musicians. And it just felt like I am fighting an uphill battle that I don't know if I want to fight every day. I don't know if every day, and I was a little bit, this was before I was doing in therapy, and mild OCD, but the kind where I was constantly checking my voice, and every morning
Yes, we all
and
remember that.
yeah. And but it's like, because it's stressful. And when I started getting into acting, and I really got to, like, let go of the idea of how is my voice feeling today, and that worry, I felt so much happier. And there's times I get that musical theater bug and I miss singing. I agreed to sing some song in a Zoom musical tomorrow, actually, that I need to work on bad. But I I think that's partly what I learned in college, and it was more gradual than a sharp realization. But it was just like, oh, I'm not. I'm struggling so much, and despite all the work I'm putting in, I'm, like, still struggling with these particular notes, um, and ultimately looking at, like, quality of life type of thing. I mean, that's also the thing that it's really hard to understand. I think when you're younger is like, oh, do I really want to do this every day in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, in my 50s? And so I still love singing, uh, but I think that's what I learned ultimately. And it might sound like a pessimistic view, and I'm sure there's some people who disagree and say maybe I just need to sing more baritone songs and I would have been fine. But I felt like I learned, like, oh, I don't have the skill in this arena that I want to have. And I'm an ambitious person and I want to be excellent at something. And am I going to torture myself because I don't have, because, who knows, my tongue is a half a centimeter longer than it would take to hit a certain kind of high note. There's biological things.
Yeah, like, who knows? And I mean, part of it is, I think, having a few years on you is like, it takes a while to figure out the matchup of what people say. And this is, my mom is a psychologist who was a researcher in the area of self-esteem. And there's that divide between what people tell you you're good at, what you feel you're good at, and what you actually have aptitude at.
Yeah.
And it takes you a while, like, you might be really great at something, but you don't actually like it. You don't want to do that. And I think you've probably found your sweet spot. It's the thing you're passionate about. Like Heath, speaking of Heath, I don't know if have you seen his YouTube channel?
No, I haven't seen his YouTube.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to link in the show notes. I want to get him on the podcast because he does his perfect pitch thing, and he breaks down songs of the musical theater genre and sings them exactly as written.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. And his video editing is really good. So anyway, I mean, he's passionate about that, and you're passionate about stand-up. And it took a while to find that, maybe.
Yeah. And the other thing I think with stand-up is, like, it's also like the feedback loop of stand-up is how I feel emotionally. I'm someone who I do need a lot of feedback. If I'm writing, if I'm doing anything, I always want to run it by people, even little things. And like with stand up, I get to in the moment try something new, try a tweak, automatically hear from the audience, was it good, was it bad? And like and I like that affirmation. And it's just like uh I like to know moment by moment that I'm doing a good job. And stand-up comedy provides that viscerally.
So how is TikTok going for you then?
TikTok is good. It's a struggle. All these social medias are emotionally, they take their toll. They're addictive. Twitter for me is the one that like is the biggest struggle. But
Struggle in what way?
struggle, it's like I come up with ideas and some do well, and then some days I'll have a day where I do 10 tweets and none of them do well. And you're constantly confronted by people my age and much younger who just seem to just pop it off. And I said on Twitter, and some people were upset by it. I said, "Oh, I miss seeing comedians who are great at Twitter eat shit on stage, because there's a lot of Twitter comedians that are terrible on stage, like astounding. Where I'm like, I don't understand how you can't, but they're different things,
Different mediums, yeah.
different mediums, and I mean, part of this I was always fine at social media. Like I kept up. I've never
You're very consistent.
Yes. Uh, and I've been forced to like do more video stuff, and it's going well. But as stand-up comics, you realize you kind of have to. There's very few comedians who they're either famous through other means or they have a podcast and don't do anything else. But I know a lot of comedians in their 50s and 60s trying to figure out Twitter all of a sudden, to know like you got to just keep up with the trends. You got to at least keep one toe in the pool.
So are you going to do a podcast then?
Yes. So I just got a new manager. I'm very excited. It's Authentic Management, and they represent a lot of stand-up comedians, which is very exciting. And yeah, they were the first. It's the first time I've had like a team involved enough in the comedy sphere that they're like, record a podcast and we'll listen to it, or let's have an hour-long meeting about your podcast idea. So I'm pretty sure it's all a go, but it's going to be called The Downside with Gianmarco Soresi. And it's basically a space where negativity is encouraged, complaining. So like, the moment if I have a guest on, I ask if they grew up in Hawaii. I say, what's the downside of growing up in Hawaii? I have a friend named Jay Jordan. He's a bisexual Black man, and he grew up in Mississippi. And the first question would be like, so is there any downsides to being a bisexual Black man in Mississippi? And from there, so I'm excited because I like to I like negativity and complaining, but in a fun way.
Yes.
And it feels just like a way I can be myself.
Is that on the horizon? Like, you have any announcement about it, or not quite yet?
Not quite yet, but I'm hoping like in a month.
Good. I will make sure that all of my guests know about it when it comes out. So then, if you were the lazy kid and you had this passion that sort of morphed as you got a little older, and did you have a backup plan? Did you have something you thought you would do if you didn't make it in performing arts? Because you went to conservatory program. That meant a professional degree. You were planning to go into it.
Yeah, I was always pretty resolute. I was kind of, I've always been kind of anti-backup plan. But I think it's very important to say that my parents had money. And that's like a huge, huge factor. For me to ever be homeless is a wild number of things would have to occur. I have a mother who's fine, a father who has money, and a former stepfather, but for all intents and purposes, my stepfather, who is very wealthy. And I always tried to keep that in mind in terms of like what kind of risks I took and like how hard I pursued certain things. And I think it allowed me to say kind of with confidence, like, there's no backup plan. I'm going to do this and figure it out. And I think I had enough cues along the way that I was like, I'll be able to get some kind of living, especially once I booked the General Electric commercials. I was like, oh, okay, I can make something out of this. you don't always get your dreams, but I do think in this sphere, if you have some wherewithal, whether you become the person who does audiobooks or the person who directs industrials on the side, like there are things to find for most people. um and that's always been my mo. I regret, uh I mean, it's easy to say this, but like I wish I had pursued some kind of job when I first moved to New York. I was in an acting company, and then I moved to New York with very few leads, and I poured a lot of money into those casting director workshops. And I poured enough money in that I did get something out of it. Like I was able to get that audition for Blue Bloods that got me my first TV spot. I got that first agent, commercial agent, manager. Um, but I think because I leaned on that, I didn't get involved in new communities, whether it be the Upright Citizens Brigade, which notoriously collapsed disastrously, but like that, or a theater group where I could have a community, meet friends, meet up and coming directors, artists, creators. I wish I'd done that, or I wish I'd gotten like a job where I met other people and like experienced what it was like to it grounds you. It gives you a sense of reality.
What kind of job might that have been?
Well, I was briefly in high school. I was a singing waiter. I don't think I would be good enough to be a singing waiter in New York City. Those singing waiters are like, you're on Broadway now. But I feel like something like that. I would have loved to have worked in like an ad agency.
Mm-hmm.
I think like that's always or just work for a casting director. I'm dating a comedy manager now, and just having conversations with her. And I'm 32. I've been in the industry. I know how a lot of it works, but just like really spending time with her, it's like, oh, I'm understanding a lot more. I'm just understanding so much more about this aspect of the industry.
That insular environment maybe wasn't helpful.
Well, I'd say my biggest complaint, and like, first of all, I was not a social person. I was in a relationship for most of college. So like I could have gone to the film department and while there was still time. My biggest complaint is like who graduated the conservatory? 12 people total, 3 of whom are still kind of active in the industry. Maybe it's more than that. Maybe I'm being rude.
It's more than that. You had a very talented class, and a lot are still in the industry. But
No, but it's not necessarily that. It's more like it's more about the number 12 than it is the percentage still in it.
yeah,
It's just like that's not a lot. And I feel envious of like people who went to Northwestern where their network was a little bit bigger. Their grade of theater kids was 150 majors, or not going to a conservatory. But when you move to New York and you compete with NYU kids, it's horrifying because like let's say I'm trying to start a comedy show. The people who went to NYU, they were in class or one class with whoever runs the comedy section of Time Out magazine now. And so you're like, why the fuck can't I get in Time Out magazine? Well, it's because you don't know them. And these NYU kids, and they're just the ones I think about the most, they have this huge network. And maybe they were in conservatories, but even those conservatories were bigger or they had more classes with other people and they were in the city that whole time. And it took a decade for me to feel like I know a wider group of people. And when you do an insular conservatory where not everyone lives in New York and some people quit and it's that small and most of them are actors, there's just not a lot of ways that network can help you. And that's my biggest qualm, I think, with conservatory training. And I could have certainly, again, as I said, I could have done more to get out to these other schools. I think that could have been facilitated a little bit more. But that's also on me for like, being like, I'm just going to practice my thing and be so good, I'll rise to the top. And you learn, perhaps too late in life, for me, not too late, but later, that network and like establishing relationships. And you can't speed up relationships. That's the biggest thing you learn is like, even when I started stand-up comedy, I could get as good as I could, but it's going to take years before I do enough gigs with someone that they go, oh yeah, Gianmarco, he's my friend. I'll throw him a bone, or we'll go on the road together.
And so much of it happens that way. When I went to grad school, it was completely cracked open for me with the writers and the designers and the kind of brain that they brought to the table. And then, and those have been some of my most unique relationships that I have now, even.
As someone who really leaned into the conservatory program, I think it's just important to embrace whatever opportunities lie outside of that conservatory. It's this very tough balance, because I still, as cynical as I am about the industry, there is a part of me that is like, oh no, I do think, like, to be a good actor, there does need to be a period of time where you're very focused on your craft, and you're very like, you're just like, you're not thinking about your professional opportunities. But I also remember, like, and you can cut this if you like, but I think these old people are all gone. I remember someone in a lower grade was like in the finals of So You Think You Can Dance.
Yep.
But like, looking back, I'm like, are you to your fucking mind? Oh, you wanted her to do the black box play? Get the fuck out of here. Go to the show.
Yes.
And that kind of thing, it can be, it's very hard. I don't envy people who have to teach artists, especially in New York. And I'm sure it's like disastrous in New York, where, you know, these kids are studying and then they get like a crazy opportunity. But I would say overall, this industry is so ruthless that the moment anything comes along, I'll never forget when I met with a manager. I think I was 22 or 23. And she said, you're a little old to have no TV credits. And I was like, oh, I was in an acting company. And then but when she said that, I mean, it was like, it feels like a damning kind of, well, I guess then I'll quit. Okay. I mean, what do you want me to do?
But those comments are I mean, that's not true either, but there's true. A perception.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, you know, I've actually thought about going on a tour to arts conservatories where I'm invited, and then like, the moment it ends, they escort me off campus, because I think there's a lot of problems. I think there's a lot of problems with the system and the way it relates to the professional world. And I think it can be very challenging for you have a large swath of faculty who hasn't participated in the professional sphere in a long time. That doesn't mean that he should be directing the showcase for agents and managers later on.
No, but I mean, let's be fair for a second, because I'm in Kansas, which you would think, oh, you know, some state school in Kansas, they don't even have to audition to get into the program. They want to study theater, they study theater. But all of our acting, directing faculty are currently working, including me. I mean,
it can be, but you need that.
Not everybody.
You've always been someone who has participated. You know, you did the French, you were doing all sorts of things. But there's so many professors who just kind of settle in. Did you see the thing with Tish where they were asking for money back because, you know, taking acting classes over Zoom loses some luster and the tuition is out of this world at New York? And she released some kind of video saying, sorry, no tuition back. And then she did like a dance. It was the weirdest shit.
I didn't see it, but I'll have to look. Yeah.
And it's this kind of thing where, I mean, it was just a huge slap in the face. So I think it's really hard to justify the cost of college at almost every single degree. But in an industry that is as hard to make a living in as this industry, I think programs in general could all do a better job of getting casting directors down there, of setting up ways that the moment they get into the world, they can attack it. And it's hard. It's just very hard.
That stuff is actually easier now with Zoom.
That's
because the artists are out of work and willing to, I mean, you can pay something and have them come Zoom in on your class, but it's like the faculty go, oh my gosh, this opportunity to work with this person. And then sometimes the students are like, I don't need to show up to that. Who's that? Yeah. I don't know.
It's hard. And we're entering a really tough sphere with social media. In some ways, like, it's good because it's more accessible for someone who doesn't have the financial connections or to kind of get in there and put their creativity out in the world. But it's also difficult because there's a lot more agents and managers and casting directors are going to look towards TikTok for casting, and it's less about the person's talent and more about like, do they have this following? And I think it's very hard for the arts because you should be able to teach acting just to be a good actor. But it's hard to not become cynical and be like, well, should I be doing this or should I be making funny sketches every single day because they're the people that get cast in the remake of She's All That? It's like now with TikTok stars or something.
I know,
And
but it's both, right? I mean,
it's both. It's both, but it's very hard to do both. And I think it's very hard in any kind of institution to I think when you're doing scene study, it's like you should work so hard on that scene. And it's very hard to like give that same level of focus and attention while you're making TikToks on the side.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I started doing a little bit of it just to kind of get into the sphere of what students are going through. Like, what is the draw? What's the rabbit hole they're going down? How much time does it really take to create? And I think a lot of them, like, I'm going to have one of my, so I may or may not I'll keep this in. So one of my students from Kansas State who graduated a couple of years ago, Noah Lindquist, he created that wear a mask video that was Beauty and the Beast that went totally viral. 3 million views or something like that. So he's going to come on the podcast. But I had a conversation with him the other day and I was like, so Noah, why don't you have anything on TikTok? And he's like, I don't know. Like it takes so much time to create something that's really good. I was like, it's not about good. It's about consistency. Just get stuff out. And I think that is a trap for some. Stand-up lends itself to that, I think, really well. Just keep trying the joke, keep trying the thing. But for actors, I think there's so much about really getting it right that stops them from just do something, let it fail and learn from that.
Sure. I also think that's what's very frustrating is no matter what you put out there in the beginning, a couple things will pop, and TikTok is better about like if it's easier for something to catch even if you don't have a following. But in the beginning, you're always like on Twitter, especially, Cardi B will will tweet like, I need some good dick today, and it'll get a bazillion likes, and you work on a sketch forever and it gets 0 or 2 and you were one of them. And it's like with social media, it's going to be rough in the beginning. It's going to be embarrassing. I released a sketch today that I spent a lot of time on that was very niche, and I'm sure it hasn't done amazingly well in the last hour we've been talking.
Oh, but tell me what it is so we can look at it.
Oh, well, did you see In and of Itself yet?
No.
Oh, it's on Hulu. It was like a magic show on Broadway for like 500 performances. And like there was something, he makes an audience member goes home with this book and then write down what they think happens for the rest of the show. And then they have to come back the next day. They bring the book. It's a huge part of the show. And all I could think watching it was like, oh, I would have lost the book.
Right.
And so it's like me intersplicing me in the show being like, hey, so it's whether it does well or it doesn't, it's like I have pushed myself, and the sketches are tougher for me because I have a little bit of a perfectionist thing, or some of them don't do as well.
A little bit. You have a lot of a perfectionist thing.
But like, I spent hours on this video, and you really have to appreciate, and I think it's very tough, of like the hours I spent. I did get better at sketch. The people who saw it know a little bit more about me. I probably got a couple more followers out of it. So even if it doesn't have the 3 million views, you have to be able to take that failure on the chin. And I know so many comedians, especially I'm 32 and I have some friends, even if they're 35 or 36, and it's just a little bit more distance with new social media apps, that like, I think they really are hurt or embarrassed to put something out there and go like, fuck, this got no likes. Podcasts are brutal, especially.
No, I mean, I'm trying to do stuff on TikTok. I did a few things, and I have a half a dozen sitting in my computer that I haven't. Well, it's partly figured. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to figure.
Once you do the podcast, people they take those minute-long excerpts of their podcast, they add captions to it, and that's their
I know.
TikTok.
I got to do that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Part of what you learn, like, because stand-up comedy is what I love. I love writing jokes. I love that craft. And part of it was like, okay, I'm just going to do that on TikTok. And now I'm exploring other things, but I'm like, okay, how can I take the thing I love and repurpose it for this medium? And like, I've learned how to take stand-up comedy. How do I write them as tweets? How do I write them in TikToks? How do I film them? What's versions of the thing that I love? And part of it is like, I think sometimes people look at TikTok and they go, well, I don't want to do scenes. I don't want to write scenes. And it's like, okay, well, what do you like? And figure out a version of that works on TikTok. It's a big medium. You don't have to do any one particular thing.
And you can also change. You can try something and go, I'm not going to do that anymore. And then at some point you'll find your groove. So tell me what you talked earlier about the fact that you had a kind of a safety net with your parents and funding. So tell me what you think your biggest risk has been on this journey.
I think my biggest, I think there have just been long periods of real of like no activity. I like when I first started commercials, I worked like crazy. I was booking, I was making money. Especially before I joined SAG, there were so many non-union commercials, and then they just stop, and you go through a year. And I think the biggest risks I took was before I was a stand-up comedian. When you're an actor, it's really hard because not every actor, you shouldn't have to be a creator. Being an actor in a perfect world, that should be enough. Daniel Day-Lewis never wrote any plays. Daniel Day-Lewis didn't do the Fringe Festival. Daniel Day-Lewis didn't have a podcast. He was good at acting and he pursued that. I unfortunately think that we don't live in that world anymore unless you're super lucky. And I think the biggest risk or mistake was just kind of, I sat in acting and just acting for too fucking long. And I went through long periods of not having anything happen. So one way that was a risk. Creatively, the bigger risk, like I had a play that I invested a shitload of time in. It went at the Fringe Festival, it went to Fringe Encores. Someone was interested in it. A year later, there was a backers audition. A year later, another backers audition. A year later, an off-Broadway run that in the fantasy version of this, it gets seen there, it gets extended, it gets moved. It either gets a huge off-Broadway run, in an insane scenario, it goes to Broadway for a month. And it really ran its month, and that was it. That was the end. And it was
off Broadway.
No, it was a 50/90s 59. So it was off Broadway. We had a month run of 8 shows a week. And, there were people who came and thoughts of maybe touring it and extension. And it just didn't go. It didn't go to the next level. And that was really, really challenging because it just felt like I always had, even when things were bad as an actor or just fallow, like I always had this play that was moving along. Something was happening. This new director is attached, or this new dramaturg is going to get involved. And when it happened, I felt a sadness even as it was happening, because I was like, oh, this is about to be over. And I don't know if it led to anything. Now, when I'm in more positive moods, I go, well, it's because of that play that my friend told me to do stand-up comedy, and that's why I'm a stand-up comedian today. But those hits that you take can be very deflating, and I would argue that it really turned me off from like producing or writing a bigger, fuller piece for a long time. It was that right before that, when I had the money from the General Electric commercials, I poured that money into a sketch comedy series. And I thought this was like right past sketch comedy's prime, in terms of like, this was when Funny or Die, College Humor, Above Average, these were huge ways to get into the comedy sphere. And I poured this insane amount of money, way more than half of what I made off those commercials, that I could have still been living off of. And I just like made this series that was very much my own voice. It was very niche. It and I'm glad I did it. I met collaborators, I learned a great deal. I got to experience what it would be like to be the star writer and executive producer of my own project in a way that like you're lucky if you ever get to experience it in your life. And but you know, it was a huge risk. I I wish I'd known more about the comedy world, but I just did it. I had money. I didn't need to live a higher level of life, and I used the money but it was a risk. It was a risk, and it hurt when I posted 16 videos that I had spent over $80,000 to make, and you know, thousands on PR, and some of them went viral. But ultimately, there was a feeling of like, oh, this did not do the thing. I don't have a pilot at Comedy Central now. I don't have a huge next level manager. My current manager had no idea what to do with these videos. You know, I got some write-ups in publications that stopped existing shortly after they published me. And I'm, you know, I think that's what you have to be. I know people less talented than me who are better producers. They create the podcast that leads into the web series that leads into the this, that, and the other, and will host a daytime talk show someday. I know people that are way more talented than me who can't figure out social media to save their life. And I it took me a long time, but not as long as some, to like be like, all right, I have to get on these platforms. I have to explore these things that don't necessarily lend itself. And I'm going to have to do that when the world comes back, when stand-up comedy died, or you know, when Zoom shows, it's just not the same. But like there was a real tough thing with a lot of comedians where some comedians were like, good, I have a podcast, I have a YouTube series, we'll just focus on this. Some comedians who, like me, who it took a little bit of time, and then finally I got into TikTok, and thank God I got some things that did well, and I was like, okay, there's something here. But you just have to constantly be doing stuff. And I think it's very hard if you're just an actor, or you feel like you're just an actor, what to do. And it's like, if you don't want to be a writer, I don't think you should be a writer if you're not a good writer, but figure out a way that you can help other people, be their actor or be their producer or do other things. Always be not just moving, but like exploring different mediums, and finding what you love.
It is an era of multiplicity, as my guest that released episode 42 said. It's it's an era of multiplicity. I want to ask you my hot button question, which is, have you made it? Quote
No.
unquote. Gianmarco, have you made it?
No, I would say no. I think I will always. I'm aware enough and have done enough therapy to know that I will never be someone who feels particularly content. Um, I I think for me to feel like I made it, it's hard. It's very hard to define. I'm very happy with my stand-up comedy abilities. I think for me to make it, I would have to feel like I'd released an hour special I was really proud of, or I don't know. It's very hard to define, but I don't feel that I've made it. And when people tell me things like you're killing it, there's part of me that wants to go like, you can't tell them, oh, your bar is way too low. Because if they're saying that, it often means that you're doing better than they are, and you don't want to make them feel worse. But it's no, I don't feel like I've made it. I I hope someday, if I became a series regular in something, you know, there's certain moniker, or like if I became a series regular in a TV show, if Netflix released an hour special, I think it would be tougher for me to say I haven't made it.
But then what's next? I mean,
Of course.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we should have known back when you did your clowning show and you pulled me out of the audience and blindfolded me and humped my leg or whatever you did, because
Sure.
I don't know, because I was blindfolded, that we knew that you would be in stand-up.
Yep.
Do you remember that?
I do. I also remember telling me not to do comedy at the showcase because he was like, you know, you're a leading man. You don't want to go there and say, you know, I'm not funny yet, but give me some time.
So I think you have to see it to be it. So who have you seen that you want to be like, especially in the comedy world? Who are you looking up to?
Yeah, the comedians I really admire. I'll I think it's interesting because I have this deeper acting background than I think a lot of stand-up comics I admire. So John Mulaney's career, I think, is an incredible career. He really started as a stand-up. He's more of a writer than I am, but he like did this weird project, the John Mulaney and the Sack Lunch Bunch, where he like pursues his wild tangential ideas. I wrote like a weird kids book, and I don't think anything's going to happen with that, but it's like, oh, there's something weird that I like. Can I have a mainstream career in stand up and then also pursue these other things? So John Mulaney, I admire tremendously. I I mean, you can cut it out if you want, but before everything, Louis C.K. had a career that was like, it was a stand-up career that was writing and then acting. Again, these are all different paths.
I liked him too.
Sure, sure. Look, none of us listen to him anymore without headphones, but it's kind of a multi hyphens who keep staying good stand-up comedians. I really do want to be excellent at something, and I admire those people who, despite expanding their careers, kept this one craft, which is not the most lucrative, even at the higher levels, kept that uh, very tight and good. So Mulaney, Anthony Jeselnik, I love. Mike Birbiglia, I love. Dave Chappelle, certainly. Just so we get some women in there. Maria Bamford, Sarah Silverman has had a pretty incredible like career.
Do you think it's a good era for SNL?
No.
Okay.
I think the show has just been around too long. And like right now there's a 20-person cast or something. That might be exaggerating, but it's way too big. Its audiences, I mean, I think Trump just did a lot of damage in terms of like, other than, to many people's lives, but comedically, like there is a strange kind of like, people want their comedians to agree with their comedians or to find their comedians like morally righteous. And I think that's an extension of like Jon Stewart, who like kind of spoke truth to power in a way where like comedy also became that. And I think Jon Stewart was one of the best at it. But I think the idea that like you need to agree with your comedians or that your comedian needs to prove that they're a good person is flawed and detrimental to something that's really funny. I think a lot of being funny is being wrong, not necessarily like where you're punching down or making fun of marginalized groups, but that you're admitting to ethical transgressions and moral flaws. And I think right now SNL just like has to cover way too much. The cast is way too big. There's people who've been there for way too long. I think you can't have cast members who are making big bucks elsewhere. I think there used to be a tougher time to like be on SNL and do a movie, and now they have these people who are real movie stars, and they're not going to try as hard. When Saturday Night Live is not the most important thing in your life, I think that's when you shouldn't be on the show anymore. And that being said, I would love to be on it in a heartbeat. And you'll be the first person I call to take this part out. But no, I it's not great right now. And I think unfortunately SNL like is the thing everyone watches. It's the thing that gets all the press. And it's like, there's so much more out there. And when you understand the pipeline into SNL or other programs, you're like, this pipeline is coming from a very, there's a reason so many of those writers wrote for the Harvard Lampoon. Like this pipeline is very specific. And even when they try to diversify some of these programs, it's like, they would try to diversify an improv school. And it would be like, well, you can do that and you should do that. But where I was growing up in Harlem, you'd have these hilarious comedians. They're not going to UCB. Like, you can't just go to UCB. Like, you have to expand past these schools. You can't just tell the school, diversify. you need to go outside of that system.
Where is the comedy happening organically in those communities? And what is the comedy saying? Not these are people who have fit the mold of that school and now can tell their story through that lens that's been created through, some privilege. So what recommendations do you have of places we should look besides SNL?
I think this is where TikTok, I think, is good. But I think it's like important, like find those people you love and figure out a way to support them. Like right now, what everyone's trying, TikTok now has a way that some people can make money on the app. But like, if you find an artist you like, take that next step of either following them on all the things or find their website. If they have a book, buy the book. If they have a podcast, listen to the podcast. I think it's just like we all have to understand that so many of artists, myself included, are putting up free content on these websites that are greatly benefiting off free content. And, no one put a gun to my head. I do it for a reason, to gain a following. But if you like someone, it's like, take that next step. And rather than, watch some shitty TV show you don't even like anyway, because it's on NBC, go to that artist, support that artist, go watch their web series, give to their Patreon. I have those people who liked a thing I put on Reddit, a joke I put on Reddit, and went to go to Amazon to watch my comedy special, and then PayPal'd me $5. And it's like, that's a really good way to support the people you like, and just figuring out a way to support those smaller artists, I think.
Awesome. I love that. How can listeners connect with you if they want to?
So they feel free to write me. I'm still not famous enough that I will get back to them. I am at Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. It's at my name, Gianmarco Soresi. So, just look at the show to spell it, but it's at.
Yeah. And we'll link a bunch of things in the show notes. And yeah, go watch Gianmarco's stuff. He's pretty funny. That when my son was younger, I was like, ooh, I cannot watch any of Gianmarco's stuff when he's little. But now that he's 17, I'll be like, okay, this is raunchy, but he's really funny. You got to watch Gianmarco. So I'm a follower.
So many things on the internet. It's over. He's seen worse shit than you've ever seen.
I'm sure of it. I'm absolutely sure of it.
Well, thank you. I was happy to
thank you for coming on the podcast. I've been wanting to have you on for a long time, so I really appreciate you giving me the time.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to the Ditch Your Backup Plan podcast. I'm Jen Valenga. Next week, we'll hear from Elizabeth Nesselrode. She's a New York actor and an acting coach who is starting up the second cohort of her online course, New to New York Theater. You don't want to miss that one. The things we've mentioned in this episode are linked in the show notes at the website ditchyourBackupPlan.com, or consider joining the private Facebook group, Fearless Friends. I'm Jen Valenga. Thanks for listening.